Thanks everyone for being here, both those of you in person and those of you who are tuning in online. I'm Joanna Lee. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Programs and Legal at the Linux Foundation and CNCF, and I want to just say a few words about the OIN and Unified Patents Linux Foundation relationship. I'm curious, how many people have heard of Open Invention Network? And how about Unified Patents? Okay, two of our in-person audience. Well, that's not a surprise. I'm impressed that there's more than one besides myself. Unified Patents and OIN are, I think of them as the secret guardians of the open source universe. In that there has been, from the beginning of open source, there in the early days, especially of open source, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty about whether open source would really thrive because of the monolithic threat, which at the time was Microsoft. Now Microsoft has seen the light and is one of the top contributors in our ecosystem, which is fantastic. But today there is still risk from organizations that hold patents and seek to extract royalties and payments from adopters of open source. And because of the incredible growth and success of cloud-native open source technologies, some of that attention is now directed at cloud-native technologies. So part of how the Linux kernel and the open source has thrived is in the background. Linux Foundation has partnered with Open Invention Network and Unified Patents to deter patent aggression threats. And that's part of the reason why we have a thriving, wonderful open source ecosystem. And I've invited Keith and Kevin here today to talk about how the risk landscape has shifted, particularly with respect to cloud-native technologies, and what we can do as a community and as individuals and organizations to help minimize that threat so that cloud-native can continue to grow and evolve and thrive. So I'll turn it over to the two of you.
Great. Thanks very much, Joanna. Yeah, we're happy to be here, obviously, and to be able to kind of socialize the message about what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And I think it's that guardian role is something that I kind of have always attached to in the 15 years that I've run Open Invention Network. My background is I have a law degree, business degree. I've worked in law, financial services, equity, as well as technology at companies like Motorola and Stanford Research Institute. And the last 15 years, as I said, I've been doing this, running OIN, and it's perhaps the most gratifying thing that I've done, because I get to do good things all the time, which is reduce risk so that people can do what's important in the community, which is develop code, have it adopted, and create innovation on top of each other's ideas through collaborative development. And so when we started this journey, it was a very different time, as Joanna mentioned, but we still recognized that the threat profile was going to be different. And I'll have Kevin introduce himself. I think it was probably 8 or 9 years ago that you guys first started. You probably started 10 years ago, but 9 years ago, I brought Kevin in and his partner to speak to my board, because I knew that the threat from patent assertion entities would become more prevalent over time, and at some point would come to the doorstep of the open source community, and it is firmly here. So we're happy to have Kevin with us, but also to have this partnership that we've had that's gone back many years.
So thank you very much, everybody, for having me. Keith, very much, Joanna, everyone. My name's Kevin Jakel. I'm the founder of Unified Patents. My background is mechanical engineering. Used to build satellites for the government, ultimately went to law school, and worked at the patent office for a little while before becoming a litigator. And then basically ended up working in-house on behalf of technology companies and facing what I think is pejoratively described as, the patent troll problem. The patent troll problem, we'll talk a little bit about how it works and why it's so frustrating. But ultimately, I decided to start a company to try and deter patent trolls from targeting specific technology areas and industries. And so when I did so, I did think it was a great opportunity to kind of partner with OIN around the open source space. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to kind of partner with him and I think do a lot of good for open source in general. And so we'll kind of get into the details of it, but good little introduction and happy to be here.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll just walk through some slides, and then it's a very small group, so feel free to if people that are watching if there's a medium for them to be able to share questions, we're happy to take those. We're happy to take them from people in the room, and we'll probably ask each other questions a little bit for clarification because we've done this once or twice. So. And the nice thing about this also, the fact that we've done this, we unified and OIN just presented at the board meeting in Monterey, the LF board meeting. It's a very, very close relationship with the leadership of Linux Foundation, and also with the leadership of other project management organizations, because they recognize the importance of patent risk mitigation, particularly in the history of as open source has evolved. There was quite a period in the middle part of the last decade and really for 10 years prior to that, where open source was happening and growing, but large companies were particularly fearful of adoption because of the concern around patent risk and litigation exposure. And so, as Joanna said, I came into this role 2 years into OIN's history, so 15 years ago. And we faced a monolithic threat at that point. It's a very different world. Microsoft was being very effective at discouraging adoption, at threatening to use its patents to slow or stall the progress of Linux. And it was a very different time. And I'm very gratified to see the way the world has changed and the fact that people recognize the interconnectedness of us all in this collaborative venture of growing technologies in ways that have never been done before, but for the notion of open source becoming significant 35 plus years ago. And so GPLv3 had very strong patent provisions, but the way it was done discouraged lots of companies and entities from getting involved in projects, and authoring entities like the Linux Foundation in doing projects under GPLv3. So you had very little GPLv3 adoption, and you had lots of adoption of permissive licenses, which tend to have, compared to GPLv3 anyway, very weak patent provisions. And so it created an opportunity for OIN to actually become a critical part of the growth of entities like Linux Foundation as it's expanded dramatically. I mean, just this project, if I'm keeping track correctly, there are at least 120 sub-projects of this one very significant project in terms of CNCF. And because of my longstanding relationship with Google, and Google being a full member of OIN, it's been very much an important part of my experience, my existence, to look at the projects that Google is very attentive to, like Kubernetes, and how they groom them internally, and how they come out, and how they appear, and are who they entrust to manage them, and then coming forward to provide patent risk mitigation solutions around those projects. And so as a sub-project, and a very important sub-project of CNCF, it's never far from my thoughts in terms of what we can do to encourage adoption, but to de-risk the general use so that we can get more and more developers in this community participating. OAN was formed, as I said, 17 years ago, now 18, soon 18 years, and IBM recognized there was a problem from day one, and they'd made their first billion-dollar investment in '99, and it was a significant beginning for them, and it was one where they recognized they were going to have to do something extraordinary to ensure that what they saw as the promise of open source could be realized, and that they could also obviously grow their businesses around the two major distributions in the world, RHEL and SUSE. And so they were the two key partners. IBM has incredible experience in intellectual property and putting together patent risk mitigation solutions, cross licenses, and so we had the benefit of their leadership, and then also other companies came in, NEC, Sony, and Philips, and then later to Google and Toyota, primarily wanting to support their two significant platforms that Google had, and the very one significant platform, automotive grade Linux, that Toyota was launching. And so our mission essentially is to reduce friction, to allow for freedom of action, freedom to operate, and people to make good choices around what technologies they want to use and how they want to innovate. 3,850 companies are part of our community. Well over 3 million patents are part of the cross-license pool that are owned by those companies. We, at our peak, owned 1,500 patents and applications. We spent over $100 million acquiring technology, acquiring patents, investing in entities such as universities or companies where we would own and have a technology deed to everything that they produce that could potentially be relevant to the threateners that are out there and enabling open source. And then we have a Linux system definition. OIN is unlike any other entity that's ever existed because we have the ability and the responsibility, really, of expanding the scope of the license to accommodate changes in where open source is going. And so we have an incredible amount of trust from the 3,800 plus companies because no other successful license has ever had this feature where a company that is the licensor has the ability to expand the scope of the license without approval of the licensee. And again, that's an incredible statement of trust from some of the most successful and the largest patent holding companies in the world. We are very global. We're by design, we're in almost every country in the world, looking to expand and grow this space so that we can support the idea that I have of the democratization of innovation that really struck me when I first started to look at open source 20 plus years ago. I thought this is really an incredible way for anyone to invent in situ from wherever they are in the world to be able to create new novelty and innovate in the way that we uniquely can in open source. Again, the breadth and the scope is very important to me. And the fact that we only have 24% North American participation is something I'm proud of. That means we have lots of other people with the growth that we've had over the years from other parts of the world. APAC was pretty much non-existent except the full member companies. So there are only 3 companies that were part of OAN when I first came in. And so I've spent a lot of time in Asia Pacific growing out that community. And for people in the I always present this in Europe because people in the European Commission seem to lose track of the fact that we are a mirror of what's going on in open source, and the largest percentage of participants in OIN come from Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so we work very closely and very explicitly, as I said before, with project management organizations and with the projects that are under those banners. To ensure that we are able to identify what's appropriate to put in the Linux system definition, which is the cross-license zone, to protect what we should be protecting, what's really important. And we also, in addition to taking nominations from those organizations and the individual project leads, we take contributions from all manner of companies that want to approach us and individuals. We've taken nominations from over 200 entities to date, and the review, we not only use the internal people that are the technical resources of OIN, we also use resources that come from the individuals that that are part of our community that we invite to participate because of the breadth of knowledge and experience that they have in open source, to be part of a technical advisory council. And so that's a very important way that we bring more presence, not just to people who are funding OIN, but people who are just important participants. Again, we live in the slipstream of the projects that are created by entities like Linux Foundation, and we want more contribution. That's one of the calls to action today, is that we want more contribution, more nominations from the various sub-projects and the project leadership of CNCF. And to me, there's always been a great parallelism between what we do and what happens in the legal world in general within open source, but also what happens on the technical side. There's a collaboration. There's individuals looking to lift each other up, to share knowledge and experience among legal membership of the various companies and institutions such as the LF and all of the corporations that support it, large and small. This is just an example of some of the things that we are including in the Linux system definition, the scoping, and this is all available on the website, the OIN website. And one of the things that I think is lost on some people, that because of what I mentioned earlier about the issues related to GPLv3, I first met Jim Zemlin, I guess, 14 years ago, and he had this view that he didn't just want to be, take care of and be the caretaker of Linux kernel, but wanted to do more. He had more ambition because he recognized there was more opportunity to professionalize the management, or the project management of projects, and allow them to be more inclusive, to be able to create more code, and to have open source be more successful as a result. And I think that's something that Mike Milinkovic has emulated as well. And I think you see Apache offering more and more kind of guidance to its projects as well, even though it has a bit different model. And so when he first talked to me, it became very clear that the vision he had of doing many projects over the following years in using permissive licenses only, that meant there was a great opportunity for OIN to be a natural partner to provide the defensive support, the patent risk mitigation. And so that was a critical kind of conversation for me, because I recognized where we fit in, and that's really carried over to the other project management organizations, even the relatively new ones like OpenAtom. This is just an example of the companies that are in different categories that are part of our community. And again, it's just a representative sample. There are 3,800 plus, so there's lots of companies we could have up on this list, but gives you an idea of the breadth of people who are actually participating in our community. Wherever open source is, wherever software is prevalent, is where we go to bring people in. What we found during a lot of our growth and history is that, as we were talking about in the preliminary comments, risk was not going to stay put, and patent risk is going to migrate. As we had more and more companies recognize, as Microsoft has, their interdependencies and the need to actually work together to collaborate, and how important open source was as a modality for innovation, we had fewer and fewer risks from operating companies. There are still some operating companies that are living on the wrong side of history, that are looking to utilize their patents in a way that can have detrimental effects on what happens in open source. That's going to continue for a while, but the number of companies is really quite small relative to what it was 15 years ago when I first started doing this. What we recognize is lots of shifting was occurring over the last 3 to 4 years in particular, where patents were being pushed out to non-practicing entities, and these entities were utilizing them to manage litigation programs that were not necessarily targeted at open source in the beginning, but were more atomistic. But over the last couple of years in particular, we see much more focus on open source because of open source's success, as Joanna mentioned from the beginning.
You think, Kevin, could one of you just for the non-lawyers in the room pause and just explain what the distinction between an operating company versus a patent troll or patent assertion entity?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously operating companies are just regular companies going about building products and services and engaged in commerce. Patent trolls are, I think, the more kind of the more popular name for them, non-practicing entities. These are companies, usually subsidiaries, an LLC that's formed, typically just owned by lawyers or some type of fund, but it doesn't make or do anything except for monetize patents by either negotiating licenses and asking for payment, or what is often the case is they bring litigation, sue operating companies in court, and then ask for what is typically a kind of a cost of litigation settlement. They don't really want to litigate all the way to the end and kind of prove that their patent is infringed and get a damages award. What they really want to do is settle out for a number that allows them to make a profit. They take some of that money, reinvest it in buying another patent, and then they do the whole thing again. So those are called non-practicing entities. They don't build products and services. They don't really do anything except for they're in the business of monetizing patents, mostly through the use of the district court litigation. So that's a little summary, I think, of what an NPE and a patent troll is.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and so if you're a company and you're an adopter of open source and you're a recipient of one of these cease and desist letters, and the cost of litigating is going to be $500,000, and they're asking for a settlement that's a fraction of that, there's a real temptation rather than fight the validity of the patent. There can be an economic temptation to just cave and pay them a smaller amount to make them go away, right?
Yeah, I think Kevin will talk a little bit more about in the next minute or so. He'll talk a little bit more about the kinds of things they do and what kinds of the subcategories of PAEs, because you've got some that are serial entrepreneurs, if you will. This just happens to be the way they make their money, where they file 10, 15, 20, 30 lawsuits a year, maybe more, and they just want $20,000 to $40,000 a pop. Then those people are concerning, but not nearly as concerning as another category that he's going to talk about. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to talk about why we actually engage them, what they do for us and for the broader community, and why we think it's so important for this community in particular in terms of CNCF to have a closer relationship with OIN, a closer relationship with the LF and through the lawyers in the LF, so that this partnership can be much more effectively leveraged. We want to find situations where patents are being used to slow or stall the progress of open source, and Kevin's a critical vehicle for us to do this through this partnership we formed.
Before we transition fully to the patent troll part of the discussion, if it's okay, I'd like to just underscore a couple of things about OIN and the value of the cross-license and why it's so important. Well, first of all, I just wanted to emphasize that the scope of the cross-license is so much broader than the Linux kernel, right? It's really grown, and it does include CNCF technologies, but I'd like that 2.1% to be, just given the importance of cloud native, to expand that definition, include more CNCF technologies. But secondly, a common question, so one of the things that I like to do is help translate legalese to non-legalese. a common question I get from open source folks is, well, why do we need a cross license? I mean, we have an open source license that covers all this open source technology, right? But the way an open source license works is, if ABC Corporation contributes to a project, and they've agreed to the terms of the Apache license or GPL or whatever the open source license is, that license actually only covers the code they contributed. It doesn't cover, the rest, unless it's, it doesn't cover all open source, and it doesn't necessarily cover parts of that project that they have not contributed. There are some exceptions, in some copyleft licenses, but in general, you license what you contribute. And so the value of this cross license is, it's not just you license what you contribute. There is this whole zone of what we call the Linux system definition, which is, of course, much broader than Linux kernel now, where you agree whether you contributed or not. There's this whole set of open source technologies that when you sign that cross license, you agree not to assert your patents against any adopters of those open source technologies. And in return, you also get a license, an agreement from all the other thousands of organizations who have signed that cross license that they're not going to assert their patents against you. And it is free to sign the OIN cross license. So I just wanted to emphasize those points.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. And I think is Microsoft, when they came and told me that they wanted to sign the license, their comments were quite telling. They said two things. One, we recognize that OIN's a litmus test for authenticity, and we need to be part of this community. And the second point they made is that because we're not part of this community, it's impairing our ability to hire the most talented people in the world. And whether this was actually what Linus told me or Greg KH or someone else in the community, but I've always been struck by this particular comment that there are 35 million coders in the world, but there are 3,000 that matter in a very specific way because of the elegance of what they produce, because of their efficiency, the thrift that they practice in terms of how they actually produce, put code out. We all need the best and most talented people in every community, in every technology. And if we can hire those people because we are authentic, and this is a community of I don't have to tell anyone here, of ultra sensitivity. When I first came into this, I was besieged with non-lawyers who said, we've got to do this, we've got to fix this. And it was amazing how many kind of jailhouse lawyers there are that have grown up in this community. People have just learned. Some people have actually become lawyers that were at Red Hat and other organizations because there was a dearth of lawyering in 25 years ago. And so it's really important that we recognize that this is a community that wants to kind of have freedom, wants to be able to do what it needs to do to be able to support growth in open source and this level of innovation that we can't rival elsewhere. And so we want members, we want lots of companies to come in. The more companies we have, the better. If you have no patents, great, you get all benefit. You don't have anything that you're putting onto the table, but at some point you may file a patent. We don't know. We don't really, determine what strategies people pursue, but as you grow as a company, sometimes the strategy will change about whether patenting is something that you want to do or not do. In any case, what you have is protection. You're insulated from patent risk from literally thousands of the most significant patent holding companies in the world. And so when people tend to focus on it, it's a no-brainer. So we're constantly beating the bush to get more companies in more industries to join. We've just spent a period of the last 2.5 years getting 35 money center and super regional banks, leading global banks, financial services companies to join our community. It kind of happens in waves like that. When we did automotive grade Linux was launched under Couchy. It created an opportunity for us to bring in rapid fashion about 18 companies, 18 auto companies. We now have over 70 auto companies and truck companies. Anyway, let's talk about why this relationship is important and why it's such a critical part of our strategy to have this relationship with Unified.
So real quick, I want to just highlight the various degrees of protection you get by participating in all the different forms of cross-licensing and things. So at the project level, you get a certain form of protection when someone commits code, but as Joanna pointed out, that doesn't cover all of the code that's in there. The next level is the cross-license up with OIN, where all of the companies that are participating across end up getting you a cross-license to what's equivalent to probably tens of thousands of patents, if not 50,000 patents. And that protection is amazing, and it allows and has allowed open source to thrive. However, there are still thousands and thousands of patents that don't fall into the hands of companies that are participating in OIN or who have made contributions to source code. But they are in the software space, they are creating patents, and some of those patents will fall into the hands of people who want to monetize them purely for the purpose of making money and don't care about the consequences it has on operating companies generally, but in this context specifically around the community of open source. So that's where unified patents fits into this overall ecosystem, which is we work to protect technology areas from those patents that are not falling into the safety of the cross licenses that are out there. And the way it plays out is kind of shown in this slide. So what happens is someone purchases a patent, or in some cases there are entities that already have them, like an individual inventor, just someone who comes up with an idea, it happens to read on open source, and he goes to the patent office and he gets a patent, and then that person decides that they can't build a business around it, so they decide just to try and sue people who are using a certain piece of code. They assert it either through demand letters, which are basically a letter that someone gets that basically is demanding money in exchange for a license to the patent, or as I kind of described, they just go ahead and bring district court litigation. Ultimately, though, the cost of fighting someone in this situation in district court almost always greatly exceeds the cost to settle. They're asking for $500,000 to litigate, and it's only $100,000 to settle, or different numbers depending on the size of the organization that's being hit. Individual inventors often do this. Some of them turn into PAEs. Sometimes the same thing happens to small companies. A small company ultimately gets a patent. It's trying to make a go at a business. They fail. Their products and services just aren't adopted by the industry. They turn into an entity that wants to litigate, and then they start trying to make money. And then obviously once they've settled, they've tried to get some money, then the choice is to reinvest some of that profit into buying more patents and suing more. And then we get into what we were kind of talking about, PAEs, so patent assertion entities. These are, in some cases, publicly traded entities that are designed to just do this process that's on the screen over and over and over and over again. They buy a patent, they settle, and then they take the profit from that process, reinvest it, and do it all over and over again. And now, unfortunately, we're looking at another entity out there, which is basically litigation funds. So these are entities out there that raise money. They have a fund, and then they invest in the monetization of patents. And they are funding all of the other kinds of NPEs in such a way that ultimately the more money that's put into the system, the more money that has to be extracted. And the one thing that's kind of a little bit vulnerable about open source, similar to other areas like standard essential technologies, 3GPP and other things, is once one company is using it, like a piece of code, it then propagates through an entire industry, and all of a sudden everyone's using it. So an NPE or a patent troll has a very easy time. Once they figure out one company's infringing, then all they do is copy and paste. All they're doing is changing the name at the top of their filing and suing dozens and dozens of companies one after another. And it's really cheap to do that once they've figured it out. So open source is in many ways a kind of a vulnerable industry to the type of manipulation of the legal system that patent trolls would love to exploit. I founded Unified to try to basically disrupt the financial model you see in front of you right now. What we do is we find the patent that's being used or patents being used against a company, and with funding from a bunch of companies participating in a technology area, we go out and try to show that that patent should never have issued in the first place. Unfortunately, many patents that come out of the patent office are invalid. It's just a fact of the system, unfortunately, and despite the patent office doing their best to try to find all the prior art that's out there, they've it's just it's a finding a needle in a haystack sometimes, and so lots of patents slip through the system. But then when you have the funding and the opportunity and the expertise afterward to find prior art, to find good arguments, you can show that many of the patents that get used by NPEs and patent trolls are invalid. And so we do that to try to disrupt this model so that they make less money and they ultimately think, hey, let's not go after open source, because if we do, Unified's going to be, busting up our efforts to try to monetize in that space. And so we play a role of monitoring and protecting the technology area, so patent trolls and NPEs can get as few opportunities to make money in this space as possible. And ultimately, they end up going someplace else, and that's part of our strategy. We work in a bunch of different areas. We started out in kind of cloud services and content delivery areas. Lots of different companies participated, and over the years, we have grown to the point where we're covering lots and lots of different areas, including some of the kind of standard essential areas I was talking about, 3GPP, video codecs, and others, technologies that actually play another role in open source as well. What's interesting, Keith and I have talked about this, that open source is kind of like a horizontal zone. In many ways, open source stretches across everything we do. Many of our other zones, we would refer to them kind of as vertical technology areas. Everything from hardware at the bottom up to end user services and products. We really, cloud services or financial services and transactions. A lot of these are very vertically oriented. The open source zone cuts across all of these, as you kind of saw with Keith showing the various industries that OIN has had success in. So this kind of shows you where we're working. This is one of the reasons why we're successful. So why do patent trolls avoid open source, and why do they avoid other technology areas when they see us kind of coming? That's because we're kind of a force to be reckoned with. So when it comes to challenging patents and asking the patent office to declare those patents invalid, or in other words, basically show that patent should never have issued in the first place, basically we're only behind some of the biggest companies in the world in doing this kind of work. So Samsung, Apple, and Alphabet are really the only entities that have challenged more patents than we have. So our 25-person organization, we're pretty proud of the work we do and how we go out there to try to deter NPEs and patent trolls from doing this. And this is kind of the reason why people, when we go after an NPE, why they're interested in either settling or avoiding us or trying to get out of the way is because when we touch a patent, the likelihood of us being successful is pretty high. And so this just gives you a little bit of idea. You can see how many patents we've shown are invalid in the open source space. It's also true that when NPEs pick patents, patent trolls pick patents, they do so, they pick really broad ones because they want to sue everybody in the space. And so they're not looking for a patent that is specific to one little company using one piece of open source. They're likely to pick a patent that's super broad, and they can kind of aim their target at dozens and dozens of companies and bring their litigation. So they're looking for some of the worst patents out there in order to fit the business model of suing companies and forcing them to settle rather than fight. This is just a sample of litigation. There's a litigation in the open source space and others, ebbs and flows. Continuously, open source is one of the arenas in which NPE activity and otherwise is targeted. Note that the last year, one entity that brings hundreds of litigations a year hasn't filed anything at all. So this is kind of an artificial drop in litigation because one entity has been knocked out, an entity called IP Edge. And they've done so because they had such a shady ownership model that a court in Delaware forced them to kind of acknowledge who owns them and who's behind all of their litigations, at which point they just stopped suing long enough for them to restructure their organization, and that they've just now started suing again. But to give you an idea of how big that one entity is, these are entities that have targeted the kind of the top 10 entities that have targeted open source over the years. And the top one is IP Edge. So this is the one that hasn't filed almost any litigation in the last year. And we're just biding our time right now until they kind of move back into the system. But you can see there's a lot of litigation over the years that has been brought. And some of the...
I think it's important, I just want to make sure we don't lose this, but this is numerical challenges. The qualitative players that are most damaging may actually reside at the bottom of the list, because if you look at SoftBank's a holding company. It's a multi-industrial company. They just put ARM out in the public offering, but they own one of the largest patent trolls in the world, and they're incredibly deep-pocketed, well-funded. So these people are a different category of risk for us. Even though they're serial litigants, they're litigators up above, like IP Edge and Rothschild. Rothschild famously sued GNU, the project, maybe 5 years ago. And so when the numbers are seen to decline, that doesn't mean that the quality of risk has changed, has fallen off. It just means that a lot of these serial litigators are maybe not as active as Kevin described. So, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely right. And what I was going to point out is in particular SoftBank, and you'll see the comment down at the bottom right, which is we refer to them kind of as litigation-funded entities, but some of the most dangerous kind of litigations involve the use of the ITC and other kind of unique specialty courts. But they pose kind of one of the biggest risks to the industry, and the favorite courts are really high-funded entities that are like SoftBank and others that pose a massive risk just because of their deep pockets and their ability to monetize. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of all the various projects that we've worked on over the years. We're really proud to be part of the open source community and doing kind of our part to help facilitate it. And this is one of my favorite slides to kind of talk about when I'm at events like this. So it feels good to be helping the open source community and protecting projects like these. This just gives you a little bit of a overview summary of kind of what we're doing at a high level. Various companies that fund the open source community. Obviously, a huge thanks to OIN and Linux Foundation and others who are participating. Microsoft has been helping to fund us, and we really appreciate their support as well. But there's a bunch of other companies that have a deep-seated interest in the open source community and have independently funded us in that respect as well. We've spent a lot of money in the open source space, and we're kind of continuing to, take out patents. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about all the various filing activities. But one area that I thought would be interesting to talk about is prior art, because it's an opportunity for this community to really participate. We have a program that's kind of fun. We basically put what we call a patrol contest out there, and you'll see we've spelled patrol with two L's to highlight, the troll part of it. But it's an interesting program where we basically put a bounty out on a particular patent and use that to incentivize crowdsourced prior art to come our way. And then we can use that prior art to either show that the patent's invalid or to just discourage the NPE from ever monetizing those patents. So we've actually, awarded tons of money over the years as part of it. This just gives you a little idea of some of the stuff that's out there right now. Kubernetes, and other projects that are kind of out there. These are just opportunities for us to continue to drive deterrence of NPEs away from open source. But this is a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on right now, and this gives you a really quick idea of what it looks like when Unified gets involved. So this is a litigation that started back in 2021, but it's just a good little example. IP Edge, that entity that brought lots of litigation, directly accused Eclipse, which is a tool for Kubernetes. Ultimately, you can kind of see litigation was started against a handful of companies. Unified kind of quickly jumped in. At that point, the litigation was kind of stalled from going after other companies. And through the process of Unified ultimately showing that this patent was invalid, no additional litigations were filed in the process, and now the patent that was being brought against the open source community has now been invalidated and can no longer be asserted. So, yes, it was asserted against a handful of companies, but what's interesting about the opportunity is for us to take action here. Ultimately saved what was likely to be many, many more litigations that could have been brought against the open source community. But by getting involved early and doing this work, we ended up saving the open source community incalculable amounts of money, depending on how many additional litigations this entity would have brought. And given that it's IP Edge, it could have been dozens and dozens, if not 100 litigations out there, because IP Edge has done that before. So it gives you an idea of what we do and kind of how we do it. So
I think, well, we just jumped to it. What we're looking to do is do more with these guys to be able to mitigate risk and take out the threats where they are actually migrating to. And more operating companies are primarily the source of patents that go to patent assertion entities, to trolls. That's where they get their sourcing of opportunity, their fuel, if you will. We have to discourage that kind of transfer. So we want to see better behavior among corporate actors so that they actually recognize we don't want to see patents transferred to patent assertion entities. We want to see more companies participate in the OAN community in the cross-license. We want to see more companies participate in doing what the LF and OAN always recognized from the beginning. We wanted to prime the pump by investing, as we have over the last 4 years, going into our 5th year of support for the open source zone. But we want corporates to come in and do what Microsoft is doing, quite frankly. Microsoft is only involved in one zone. They do a lot. If you look at the list, they were, I think, right after Unified. They're the next largest individual filer of these challenges for poor quality patents. And so they have stepped up, but there are lots of other companies that we think have a vested interest in supporting this, that don't necessarily have their own significant programs and are going to benefit greatly and are going to be leaders. I mean, we think about OIN. OAN is a free license. Those companies that got together and spent $20 million of valuable capital that they could have used in other ways as companies to support this, they did that to support, as leaders, to support the entire communities, the whole notion of freedom. And we want to see that kind of exercise of support to be able to create leverage in this important tool to attack more poor quality patents that are out there, so that we can be further ensured of a frictionless environment. We want people to be able to make good choices, and we need partners like Unified, and we need to see an expansion of the open source zone to ensure that we are in a better position as a community to be able to weather the storm that's created by all the capital, the billions of dollars that's going in to support litigation. And so, for us, there's also a SPDX program that there's no way to translate. This is just an aside. It's been a project of mine for years, but I've always looked for a way of translating code into prior art. Otherwise, it's not effective in this very important way. We have millions of lines of code. We have no effective use of it as prior art. And so SPDX has a field that's a summary field. We'd like to get CNCF support and other project support so that there's rigor around what goes into that summary field, so that we can actually share that with the patent and trademark offices around the world, so that can be a source of prior art that then reduces the risk of patents being granted on known functionality.
And ultimately, that prior art will then allow me to, challenge patents in a way that keeps the open source community safe. So increasing the availability and the quality of the prior art like this is a program that I think is really important and could be, reap very, very large rewards in the future. I think we're basically getting kicked off here. I just wanted to say thank you for having us. I really appreciate talking to everyone.
Yeah, we have one question from one of our virtual attendees. I hope I say this right. So, what are your thoughts on the likes of Dolby and Fraunhofer providing patents for a patent pool managed by an MPE, Vectis IP, to target the Opus codec that is an open source project? Any thoughts on that?
We see these kinds of situations as being normal business operations for large entities. Fraunhofer is notorious for pushing patents in one place or another, doing its own litigation, and it's not surprising that they put them into pools to create more leverage so that they can get bigger returns. So Sysvel is an entity in Italy that's been doing this for decades, to aggregate patents and then permit suits. They do it a lot with standard essential patents. And so this is kind of business as usual for people who are in the business of monetization.
And I'll just say one thing about patent pools. Kind of regardless of who is running a patent pool, patent pools can be a force for good or bad. It's like so many other things in life and in business. Patent pools can be a source for getting a license to a technology and all the patents that are covered by that patent pool at a price which in some cases can be quite effective. And there are certain patent pools that have been wildly successful in helping the adoption of that technology. There have also been lots of patent pools that have set a price that is trying to kind of hold an industry hostage to pay a number that is, year after year getting more and more expensive, which is kind of weird when most technologies, once they're introduced, they're expensive, but over time they drop. There's patent pools can really run the gamut on this, and obviously we'll just have to see where this particular one turns out and how it works. But patent pools can be both good and bad.
This up. Kevin, for the non-lawyers in the audience, would you explain very succinctly what prior art is, why it's important, and then also how people can find out, like where to go on your website to contribute prior art?
succinctly. Yeah, real quick. So yeah, prior art. Unfortunately, I use that term. We all kind of banter it around without realizing not everyone knows what it is. Prior art is basically evidence. It is the kind of evidence, in particular, that you use with the patent office to show that a patent should never have issued in the first place. So, you know, if you apply for a patent, you go to the patent office, and what the patent office will do is try to go out and find if there's any prior art showing that the patent and the idea in the patent actually existed in the public domain prior to the filing of the application. Now, if the patent manages to get through the system and they don't find prior art, like I was saying, sometimes this evidence that's out there might be a needle in the haystack. And it's only after a patent has issued, it lands in the hands of an NPE in the context of Unified, and then we go out there and we say, okay, we're gonna do an extra deep dive on trying to find the evidence that could show that this patent should never have issued, that really this idea belonged to the public prior to the filing of this application. In doing so, that prior art will invalidate, with good arguments, the patent that's being used against open source. So the value of the prior art in many cases is the foundation for the work that Unified and other entities do when they're trying to protect themselves from patents being asserted against them.
And requests for prior art when you're seeking to invalidate a low-quality patent, are those posted on the Unified Patents website?
Yes, they are. With the Unified Patents website, we've got the patrol contest there. Anyone who happens to, you know, want to earn a couple $1,000s and see what's out there, just log on and see what
Financial incentives.
There's a financial incentive. Yeah, we want to encourage people to find good prior art, show us what they've got. And in this context, it is often the case that, you know, coders and others were long ago the first time to implement something. In some cases, if it's just code, as Keith was pointing out, we might not be able to interpret it, or at least interpret it fast enough, or at a price point which makes sense, because we might not be able to understand what's going on, even though that idea was put into code and has been used, you know, maybe thousands of times before the patent was issued. Now it's being asserted against all that code, but we got to be able to prove and show that that idea was out there, that it qualifies as prior art to the particular patent that we want to kill.
There's a particular example of this that's relevant to this community. The white papers and the presentations that were done before the white papers appeared for Kubernetes, that was 23 years ago from my count. There are patents that were issued 19 years ago, 20 years, and 21 years ago that read on Kubernetes that should never have been granted, but for the fact that that non-patent art, because there's patents that serve as prior art, and then there's other stuff. It can be, again, a presentation made at a conference. It can be a white paper. Those things were not identified by the Patent and Trademark Office. That's why they issued patents that should have never been issued on Kubernetes months and years after the original work was first came into the public domain.
Thank you so much, Keith and Kevin, not just for being here with us today, but also for all the work that your organizations have been doing in the background. Really appreciate that, you know, being the secret guardians of the open source universe. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.